Hello and welcome to Everybody Has a Story with Jeff Seltzer. I am your host, Jeff Seltzer. Thank you once again for joining me on this journey that I have in terms of learning whatever I can about my guests, sharing a few stories about myself, and just having fun along the way. If you listen or watch every week, thank you so much. It really means a lot to me that you keep coming back. And once again, like I said last week in my solo pod, it really means a lot to me to all those new listeners, the people who come in, try it out, come back again, take a look, right? Really a lot of fun. Really enjoy the fact that you guys are interacting and engaging, and so happy that you guys are along with me on this journey. Wanted to remind everybody that we are available on Instagram at Everybody Has a Story Pod. If you want to send me a note, send me comments, feedback, plus or minus. If you want to be a guest, send me a direct message on there. Additionally, my personal Instagram is at Seltzer77. You can reach the show directly at everybodyhasastorypod@gmail.com. That's the email address. And as always, for all things Jeff Seltzer, you can go check out jeffseltzer.com. Wanted to remind you again, too, that we are on all podcast platforms, video and audio on Spotify. You can also find us on Apple, on iHeartRadio, on Amazon, on Pandora, not Avatar Pandora, like the listening Pandora, the Sirius XM bot. That's where we are. If you find any other podcast platforms that we're not on, definitely shoot me a note. Let me know. I'd love to get myself up wherever we can get up. With that said, I'm really excited about this week's guest. I wanted to welcome to the show my friend, Amit. Amit, how are you today?
Doing well. How about yourself, Jeff?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So before getting into the key topic that I'd love to talk about with you, would you mind giving us a little background on who is Amit?
Absolutely. So my name is Amit Mishra. I live in Scotch Plains, New Jersey, the beautiful little town nestled, under the Watchung Reservation. I have a wife and two kids. My daughter just started middle school this year at our middle school here. And I work for a healthcare organization in Manhattan, and I grew up in India. I was born and raised in India. Finished high school in India and moved here after high school to go to college in Texas. I went to A&M, go Aggies, and then eventually moved up here to New Jersey, seeking opportunity. Obviously to close the Big Apple, and have been in New Jersey now for about 18 years.
Nice.
And met my wife here, and the rest is history.
Very awesome. Again, thank you for sharing, Amit. Really appreciate all of that. So we'll get a little bit more into your background in a little bit, but I wanted to first just kind of share with everybody what really excited me the most about having you as a guest, right? So obviously, I think you're an awesome person, Amit. I really think you're great. I met Amit through my buddy Scott. So shout out to Scott Koplowitz if you're out there. Hey, Scott. Even before I met Amit, Scott was talking about this guy named Amit who flies airplanes. He was like, Amit is a pilot, like legitimately, like he has a day job like we all do, but as a hobby, he has his airplane license, he can fly, whatever else like that. To me, is super intriguing. Just to give a little background on myself, as I've talked about in the past, I have severe motion sickness. Like for me, if you name the vehicle, I've probably thrown up on it before. I've puked on helicopters, airplanes, buses, trains, cars, basically every roller coaster in Disney World or Universal Studios. Like I've probably thrown up on it. So for me, the idea or the concept of flying for fun always intrigued me, I guess. I mean, I get that we're all built differently and wired differently. And I get that most people don't have the same, let's say, ridiculous motion sickness that I do. But I really wanted to learn more about somebody who does this and enjoys this and has fun with it. Because again, we all have different hobbies. We all have different interests. So I'm trying to learn as much as I can about it from other people. So again, Scott told me all about this. I was intrigued. I've talked quite a bit with Amit. And Amit has mentioned that, like, he has a whole journey on how he got into flying. So firstly, I wanted to ask you, Amit, like, what was the first time you ever flew in an airplane? Like, not necessarily even like piloting, but like actually getting in a plane and going from point A to point B.
Yeah, so that's a great question. It goes way back. So I don't know if we've talked about it, but my father was a pilot in the Indian Air Force.
Oh wow!
So I was born into it, right? I mean, it's in my blood, I guess.
Right.
So I grew up. I was born, and lived on a military base, an Air Force base, most of my life. So I've heard the sound of airplanes and seen airplanes and sat in airplanes. Not flown in fighters necessarily, but sat in airplanes growing up. obviously because he was a pilot, we did travel by plane, not because not because it was his job, not because he would fly commercially, but we would get because he was a government employee as an Air Force pilot, we'd get some privileges. So we were fairly young when we started flying within India to go to, see our grandparents or see other people. But of course, what got me to fall in love with flying is watching him, do it every day of his life, right?
That's pretty awesome. So, okay, so your father flew airplanes, which is pretty awesome. Fast forward, as you mentioned, you grew up in India, but then eventually came over to the United States, Texas, and you're in Jersey now. So, I guess at what point in, let's say, your adult life did you kind of think to yourself, you know what, my dad did it. I really enjoyed watching that. I would like to start the process to see how I can fly airplanes.
Yeah, yeah. So this was about 10 years ago, about 10 years ago, and I was already married then, and with Nandita, my wife. And it had been a dream of mine since I was young, but then these things just get I guess you reshuffle some priorities and stuff,
Of
and
course.
focus on your career, focus on at that time I met my then girlfriend, and so it wasn't always a priority. So 10 years ago it sort of rekindled. I met someone at my workplace at where I used to work then, and he said to me, he said, "Oh yeah, yeah, I fly for fun," and I said, "Oh yeah, that's really cool." I said, "Where do you keep your plane?" He said, "Oh, I keep my plane in Linden. Why don't you come by one day? I'll give you I'll show you around, give you a ride." I said, "Really? You do that? That's pretty fascinating." So I sort of had that, um, the expression you probably did when you heard me talk to you the first time, or Scott did when I talked to him the first time. Like, wait a minute, you can just do that? You can just keep an airplane and go flying? And so I was pretty starstruck. And
Right.
his name was Aman. His name was Aman. So Aman said, "Come on over," and we picked a weekend, and I went over and saw him at his hangar, his airplane, and watching him be able to do that sort of set that ball in motion. So I went up flying with him. We went over the New York City skyline, came back. I rushed on my wife and I said, "Honey, you won't believe this, but I think I found the biggest love, right? Aside from you, of course,
Of course.
I want to be a pilot, right? So that's how it started."
Nice. That's pretty awesome. So you flew with him, which again, I'm sure at that point was just kind of just mind blowing, as you said, right? Somebody can actually own an airplane. I mean, some civilian, right? An individual can own an airplane. So you were in love with that, and at that point, you said to your wife, "Hey, this is what I want to do, kind of as a hobby." So at
Yep.
that point, I assume you have to take lessons, or do you go to school for it, or kind of like what does that look like?
That's right. That's right. So yeah, you have to go to school for it. So you have to. So you need a license to fly, just like you need a driver's license to drive, or a motorcycle license to ride a motorcycle, or a boat license.
Right,
So you need an FAA issued a pilot's license. And there's a couple ways to do it. You could go to school full time, sort of like how you have college. So you could enroll in an accredited school. It's called Part 61, and you have a curriculum, and you can study, and you can do classes and flying with them. Or for more people like you and me, which who have regular jobs and families and other schedules, you could enroll in it's called a Part 160 or 141, where you can take lessons based on flexibility, right? Based on when you can.
right,
So fortunately for me, I started Googling. I said, "Oh, where's the closest airport? Where's the closest lessons?" And there are some around Scotch Plains, not too far. There's one close to Bridgewater. There's one in Somerset, one in Linden. But fortunately, I found one only about 7 minutes away from my wife's parents' house, who live
okay,
in Marlborough. And we spend a lot of weekends with them. We do visit them on weekends. We spend weekends with them because they get to see the grandkids, and we get a little time off. We get a little help with the kids,
definitely helps.
and we love them. Of course, we love them, and we love spending time with them. We're
Of
fortunate to
course,
have parents close by. And one thing to know about me is I'm an early riser. So I wake up at 5 a.m. We'll go to the gym, or we'll do something. We'll come downstairs and work on a project early in the morning. But when I'm at my in-laws, I don't have a lot to do because it's not my house. So it sort of was a perfect marriage right there, right? So I had the mornings,
right.
and I had a flying school was 7 minutes away. So I showed up at the school and I inquired, and one thing led to another, introduced me to an instructor. who I'm very, very close friends with still 10 years later.
Nice.
And then I enrolled in school.
That's awesome. Um, so going to the school, like I know, obviously my experience is not quite there, but like from a driver's license perspective, right? First, I took driver's ed in school, learned kind of like the hows, like how things
Yep.
happen, how things work. Eventually, I take a written test,
Yep.
pass the written test, and then I'm, on the road with an instructor and have to do a number of hours of that. Is it a similar concept from a flying perspective? Like, do you have to kind of learn
Yep.
things like in the classroom first, and then you get to go out there with an instructor?
That's correct. That's correct. So you have two components. You have the classroom training and you have the flight training, right? Well, in my case, I didn't do a lot of classroom training with an instructor in a classroom because I was doing it, part time.
Okay,
So I did it myself. So I'd, read. There's books. There's FA manuals. There's other books you can buy. There's companies like Sporties and King Flight Schools. There are other companies that are in the market that, issue a lot of material for people like you and me who recreationally fly.
right.
So I read books, when I was on the bus going to work, before a bedtime story, I guess. I read books as much as I could. Right? You have to really brush up on a lot of fundamentals that, when you were young and you learned about moments and center of gravity and cruxes and balancing weights, and you tend to forget that over time, right? I had
Right.
completely forgotten that until 10 years ago when I started learning how to fly. When you start learning how to fly, you bring all those principles back. A lot of geometry, a lot of mathematics, and a lot of physics, so you relearn. So it's not very difficult because you know some of it already, right? You're just relearning it. And then the second part is a flight training. So you need a certain number of flight hours. You need a certain number of flight hours with an instructor. You need a certain number of solo flight hours, and then you need there's some requirements on, based on length of flight. They call cross country, certain number of cross country flights, certain number of landings at a towered airport, XYZ, until you're comfortable and you can fly with the chief instructor and the chief instructor signs you off, and then you can go and schedule an FAA flight exam. Of course, you have to do a written and a flight. Actually, there's an oral, a written, and a flight exam.
Oh wow. So getting back to the books for a second. So obviously, as you said, a lot of science, a lot of math, which makes sense, right? Because you have to understand how your actions impacts the plane and such like that. Is there a part of the lesson where like it tells you like what each button does? Like I've, when I was little, I probably got sent to the cockpit of the airplane. It's kind of like,
Yep.
hey, go check it out. And there were so many buttons, levers, and like gauges, whatever. And we've seen it in
Yep.
movies and such like that.
Yeah.
Like, do you learn that like in the book aspect, or do you not really learn too much about that until you actually get behind the wheel?
Yeah, it's good. It's a great question. Very good question. So no. So the thing is, with airplanes, every airplane is a little different, right? But they all have some things in common, some elements in common, right? There's a what's called a six pack, right? Not you know not my family pack, but they have a six pack. So there are
Yep.
certain things, no matter what you fly, whether you fly a small puddle jumper or a fighter or a Boeing, there's certain basic fundamental uh, devices, certain instruments that you use to fly, and that doesn't change. So you learn about those. You don't necessarily learn about every button or
So
every
would that be
system
similar to
because
how, like, in let's say driving training, like
exactly.
it's got a steering wheel, it's got a gas pedal, it's got a
Yep,
brake,
exactly.
but you may not necessarily know. Everyone doesn't necessarily have like a sunroof, or
You
not
nailed it.
everyone
Yeah,
not
they
necessarily
don't
have
teach
that
you
kind of
about
stuff.
every button, and they don't teach you
Right.
about every button in that car. Well,
Yes.
that's car to car. So when you get into the car that you want to fly, you learn that a little bit. And
Right.
the way pilots' licenses work is it works by categories. So my license allows me to fly any aircraft that's below 12,500 pounds, right?
Okay.
So if I have to fly a bigger aircraft or a heavier aircraft than that, I have to be something called type rated in that specific make and model of aircraft. So you may have heard of airline pilots, right? So
Yes.
they have to do a certain bunch of sim training, and they have to get type rated in the specific model of aircraft they fly.
Oh
So
wow.
an Airbus pilot can't just switch over and fly Boeing the next day. I mean, even within manufacturers, a Boeing 737 pilot cannot just go walk up to a 747 or 757 fly. They have to be type rated in that specific make and model. For me, fortunately, it's not as stringent because most of the smaller planes are fairly similar. with the exception of some avionics and some, these days we're moving more to digital gauges than the steam. We call them steam gauges, the analog
Okay.
gauges. So other than learning some of those, the fundamentals are very similar.
So, which is awesome. Thank you again for sharing, Amit. So, with that said, you currently have a license where you can fly a plane that's 12,500 pounds or less. Let's say you wake up tomorrow and you're like, you know what? I'd like to fly commercial. Like one day, I want to fly for United or Delta or whatever, and I want to
Mhm.
fly one of those 747s or whatever. Like, do you get some credit for the work you've done, or is there like a
Absolutely.
whole training school you have to kind of go through? Regard, like, what does
No,
that
it's
look like?
yeah, no, that's a good question again. Yeah, you absolutely do. So the way we log hours is we log hours by command, right? So if I'm in command of my aircraft, irrespective of how big or small it is, I log that as a, in command flight in my type and make and model of airplane, right? So it all counts. So for to advance your ratings, so we talked about the license. On top of the license, you can add endorsements, like you can do like the driver's license, right? You can add endorsements now.
Right.
So the endorsements start with something called instrument rating, which allows you to fly using the instruments in, through the clouds and through fog and poor visibility. Let's call it we call it IMC conditions, instrument meteorological conditions. And then you can add things like commercial. So there's a requirement to achieve a minimum number of hours in command to be able to get your commercial rating, and then you continue that all the way up until you get your airline transport pilot rating. So the commercial rating is, I believe it's 250 hours.
Okay.
I have about 500 plus hours, so I'm obviously eligible for commercial ratings. But of course, you have to go back to school. The commercial training is a little more involved, right? They teach you every pilot learns, disaster recovery techniques and how to mitigate for emergencies. But obviously, with a commercial license, you get deeper into it, right? You start flying faster, more complex airplanes, start learning more. Techniques, because you're now carrying passengers and there's liability, so you learn a lot more advanced techniques. And then of course the airline transport pilot requires 1,500 hours, right?
Okay.
So that's pretty significant. You can imagine the amount of experience an airline transport pilot has before they fly an airline, with 1,500 hours of either doing instruction or doing banner tours. You've seen those guys doing the banners over the shore, or one or the other, flying commercial, charter, whatever, So it takes a combination of hours and training
Got
to
it.
get those endorsements.
Very cool. So going back again to when you were still training to be able to get the license. So the first time that you're behind the wheel in the airplane and there's nobody in there with you, right? So obviously, as you said, you do some hours with an instructor, and then you have to also log a number of hours by
Yep.
yourself. Like that first time when you're in the plane by yourself, like is that a scary moment? Like what does that feel like? Right? Because
Yeah, yeah.
it's like I could tell you, like I mean, you probably know it, right? From like a car perspective, like years ago, we have a driving lesson, we have a license, then all of a sudden you're getting in the car and you're driving by yourself. And it's a very like weird feeling.
Yep.
And that's
Yep.
on the ground, right? So again, cars are no way 100% safe, but it feels like there are other variables, let's say with an airplane, right? You have to deal with control towers, whatever else like that. Like, what was that feeling like, and kind of what was going through your head the first time that you flew by yourself?
Absolutely, yes. So this is it's interesting. So just before I tell you that, the solo happens very quickly, quicker than you imagine, right? Some student pilots solo in 6 hours,
Oh wow,
right? It's like six lessons, and now they're
yeah,
going solo. Some student pilots need about 25 hours. There's depending on where you're comfortable, right? And when your
right,
instructor is comfortable. I think my solo was somewhere in the 12th or 13th hour, so it wasn't very far along. I'd taken a few lessons. I'd taken about, I don't know, a couple of months worth in lessons, maybe a month and a half, 6 weeks, or 7 weeks worth in lessons, and it comes up very quick. So we went out for a lesson. We came back and we landed, and the instructor got out, looked at me, he said, "Where's your logbook?" I said, "Why? What's wrong?" He said, "I'm gonna endorse you. You're ready to solo."
oh
I
wow,
said, there's no way I'm ready to solo. I barely made that last landing. I was struggling through that last landing and, fighting the pedals and fighting the gusts. He said, "Nope, I can tell. Listen, I've been doing this a long time. I can tell when you're ready." And of course, just to shine light on instructors. Instructors are obviously it's a niche area, flight instruction, right? You're teaching someone to fly an airplane. Very unusual, right? It's not very common.
Right.
But they obviously working with many students. They have picked up the skill to assess your qualities and your strengths before you have, right?
Yeah.
Also, they don't take chances. If he endorses me and I go up in solo and have a mishap, it goes on his record,
Right.
right? His or her record. In my case, it was Greg. It goes on Greg's record. So
Poor Greg.
so he wouldn't just endorse me without having immense confidence. So anyways, I pull up my logbook, and it happened very quickly. So he endorsed for solo, and he got out of the airplane, stood on side, and said, so long. And I said, yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just follow my training, and I'll do this one step at a time, and I'll be okay. That's what I'm saying to myself in my head. One step at a time, I'll be okay.
Right.
All right, so I start the airplane back up. We follow something called a checklist. Every pilot, every airplane follows a checklist. Even a fighter pilot or an airline pilot, they all have checklists, right? It's one of
Sure.
those safety measures that we all do. So anyways, I go through my checklist. Okay, let's go top to bottom, right? So we're checking the airplane. We're going through the systems. We're starting the airplane. Okay, we're taxiing, checking the brakes, doing a run up. We test the engine performance and we test some of the components. We test some of the gauges. Fantastic. So I'm now at the threshold, runway threshold, about to get on the runway. I'm thinking to myself, okay, one step at a time. What's the next step, Amit? I guess I have to cross the threshold and get on the runway.
That's right.
I announce it. I get on the runway. I announce my takeoff. I hit the roll. I'm in the air. And that's when it hit me. I said, wait a minute. All this while, I had the opportunity to turn around. I
Right.
had, until I was at the threshold,
You
I
can't
had the
bail it.
opportunity.
You can't
Yeah,
bail at
I
that
could
point.
bail. Yeah,
No.
now I'm climbing out by myself and I'm looking over the right seat and there's no one there. I
Right.
can't ask him for advice. I can't tell him, hey, take over. I'm not comfortable, right? There's nothing I can do anymore. Now it's all me.
Yes.
Okay, Amit, focus. What's next? All right, so we have something called patterns we follow, right? There's rules, just like you have entrance ramps and exit ramps to highways, or using road. We have a virtual entrance exit ramps, and we have patterns we call them. So I said, just keep following the pattern, Amit. You'll be fine. So I go up, I take off, I call my crosswind. It's when you go cross the runway. Different airports do it in different directions. I obviously had trained at Old Bridge Airport, so I knew the patterns. So I did my patterns. I turn around, go downwind, and now at downwind I'm just cruising. You level off at downwind, you cruise. So I'm cruising down, and I'm looking at the runway besides me, and I'm saying, all right, so the next big thing is to get the plane down there. Now,
Right.
I don't know if this is a statistic. Don't quote me on this, but
Yeah.
I mean, the 80% of people give up on flying because they can't land the airplane. Right?
Oh
The
wow.
landing
Yeah.
is the hardest part of the. Landing is a controlled crash. Right? It's
Well, I imagine you're probably dealing with winds. You're probably dealing with obviously the
you're
different
dealing with a lot.
meters, a
Yeah,
lot of,
a
and even
lot.
like
Right?
your own head trying to say like, how's this going to work? Like, get in your own
Yeah,
head and you're
yeah,
screwed. Right.
exactly. So there's a saying in aviation. Any landing you can walk away from is a good landing.
Right.
But any landing you can walk away from and reuse the airplane is a great landing.
Yes.
So in my head, I'm thinking, I wanna aim for a great landing, but I'll be happy with a good landing at this point.
Good enough will do. Right.
Good enough to walk away from. So I follow procedures again. When you're training, it's drilled into you, procedures, right? You follow the
Yeah.
procedures step by step by step. So I follow the procedures, and I managed to make that first landing. Went around for three more. You do three takeoffs and landings solo the first time. So I went and did three solo takeoffs and landings, and then what happens is when you get out of the airplane, they cut your shirt tail off. I don't know if you've seen that. It's a tradition that goes way back. I mean, way back when the military had trainers sit in the back seat, right? They had the instructor sit in the back seat, and they didn't have radios back then, so they would tug at the shirt tail to give the student instruction. So
Yes.
once the student solos, you no longer require the shirt tail. So it's a tradition to cut the shirt tail off. So typically the instructor, as soon as you get out, will cut your shirt tail off
That's
and
great.
will sign it, and then they'll put it in the flight school the office. Right?
That's awesome. I mean, I'd heard the cutting the tail in the past, but I never had the background in terms of why. Like, it didn't make any sense, but I mean, the context you just gave was spot on. Like, that makes total sense. Go back to the tradition before being able to hear people, and that's what you did. So that was awesome. Question I would have, like, so obviously, you're in control. You know what you're doing. You've gone to the school. You feel probably good enough at what you're doing. when you start doing this, what is your wife or girlfriend at the time thinking? Right? Is she thinking, "Great, I'm going to be a widow if this doesn't go well," or is she like, "Amit's got it. This is going to be amazing. Like I'm all for it. I'm super excited about this."
Yeah, it's a tough one, right? Because obviously, she has a certain amount of confidence, having grown up and around airplanes, having trained, successfully and got my license, and having done my check ride with an examiner. But yeah, I mean, it is dangerous. It can be dangerous, right? You're up there. Look, the plane does float, right? So if something goes wrong with the engine, I can float down.
Right.
But what makes a difference is proficiency, right? So there are pilots that have 15,000 hours that have unfortunately made a mistake and lost their lives.
Mm,
So at no point can you get um, cocky about it. At no
of
point
course.
can you be overconfident.
Right.
So you have to be, and every flight is different. Every time I go up flying, I know the fundamentals, I know the procedures, but they're different challenges. The winds are more challenging. The airport I fly into can be very challenging. The runway width, the runway lengths, the obstacles around the runway, the fuel you carry, the passengers you carry, how you balance the airplane. There's always a lot of variables. The weather is a huge variable, right? I mean, the weather changes rapidly sometimes. When you're flying, longer distances, especially. So anyway, so I think it's a very important to have a humble outlook towards this,
Of
and
course.
understand that everyone's vulnerable, and to be extra careful. So my wife knows that if there's one parameter out of whack, I'm not doing this. I'm not going flying until I'm convinced that I have control over every single one of those variables and I understand them, and I'm not taking any risk, right?
Right.
There's a certain mechanical risk which I cannot avoid or predict, right? If
Of
my
course.
engine goes out, but other than that, as long as I'm doing my checks, dotting the I's and crossing the T's, that's a confidence. Of course, she's always a little nervous when I go flying, but like I said, it is something you have to accept. It can be a little intimidating. So my
Yeah.
my wife's parents refuse to accept it. Just to give you context there. So my wife accepts it because because I love it, and she does fly with me on occasion, not
Okay.
as much as I would like, but when she feels like it. But my wife's parents are absolutely against it, right? So they will not fly with me, and they will not. They prefer that she didn't fly with me and the kids didn't fly with me.
Right.
So it
I
depends
mean,
on your risk
yeah,
outlook, and depends on how you grew up and what you're used to, right? I mean, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, totally get it. I mean, obviously, it's one of those things where for like your wife, she doesn't have the control, but obviously supports and loves what you're doing. And again, recognizing that you've gone through all the lessons, you've got the experience, you've got all the hours. So, logically it makes sense, but there's always, like, as I see with your in laws, like that whole psychological or emotional piece that, like, even if
Yep.
everything makes total sense, it's still kind of like, yeah, but he's flying a plane, right?
Yep.
So, completely get it. Not optimal, but obviously we have to work with what we have.
Yeah, I think a lot
Um,
of people define it as worth, right? So what is it worth, right? Okay, an airline
sure.
pilot does it because it's his paycheck, right?
Yes.
Somebody else, a military pilot does it for, it's you're
Patriotism and
defending the
such,
country,
right? Yeah.
patriotism, learning how to defend the country, right? There's
Right.
purposes. I do it to get a burger, right? My in-laws think I can, you want a burger? We'll drive down to Bear Burger or Five Guys down the street, and we'll get you a burger for $10 rather than spending. It's called $100 hamburger, right?
Yeah,
When pilots fly to get burgers, it's called $100 hamburger because you're spending so much money on fuel, and if whatever, you're
of
spending
course.
time and money, and at the end of the day you just get a burger, right? So it depends on the outlook. Obviously for me it's more the experience, it's a journey, it's also the destination that I can travel to. I can travel wide and far
Yep.
without having to worry about traffic and other things. But anyways, for some people, it's just not. It's
Yeah.
not worth it, right?
Yeah. I mean, it makes for a cool story. Also, I mean,
Yeah.
like I know what a few weeks ago, you and Scott were flying somewhere, and Scott sent me some pictures of you guys parked right next to or just missed Michael Jordan's airplane.
Yes, that's
Um,
correct. Yeah.
can you tell me a little bit about that story, like where you guys were going, what you guys were doing, and kind of like what you thought about when you saw the great one, Michael Jordan's airplane?
Yeah, that's a cool story. So I just gotten back. We were on vacation. We were in Ireland, and I just gotten back and learned that one of our friends, Jim, who lives in town as well, and his family were staying at a property of Ocean City, Maryland, right close to the beach, close to Assateague National Park, I think it's called. So we got, we came back and we started chatting on, we have a group chat, and we were talking about, and Scott, Jim, and I. And Jim says, "Hey guys, why don't you come down and visit me? It looks like a beautiful weekend, and we have this house. And why don't you come down and visit me? We'd go hang out at the beach." And so, anyways, Scott and I, talked to each other, and we said, I said, "Scott, are you available? Do you want to go down on a Saturday?" He said, "Yeah, I'm available. Let me see what let me see what order of things." And obviously, he got clearance, he got permission to go. I got permission from my wife and kids, and actually, we took our kids with us. I took my daughter Anamika, and he took his son
Okay.
Aaron with us. So we took them with us, and we started heading out. We took off. We made a plan. We talked to the controllers, let them know what our intention were, and we started flying down towards Ocean City.
Nice.
About halfway through, we learned that they had shut down the airport.
Oh no.
They shut down the Ocean City airport because there was an air show, and there were some military performers. There were some F-35s. There were some, actually, the Italian aerobatic team had flown in, right? Italian aerobatic team had flown in
Oh wow.
to perform at that show. So we said, "Oh, what a bummer." So we made a change in plans. We talked to the controller. We diverted to Salisbury. So we weren't ready to give up just yet. We said, let's divert. We're determined to make it there and see Jim. So we diverted, went to Salisbury, Maryland. We were able to land, and that was not our original intent. So we did not know what to expect at Salisbury. Fortunately, they were welcoming, and they gave us, clearance to land, and reeled us in. Now, so we weren't expecting this. We had no idea what to expect. We landed Salisbury. They gave us instructions to taxi back to the fixed base operator there. And as we're taxiing, we see a peculiar looking jet, and I'm taxiing down towards the parking spot, and there's a ground controller bringing me in with those orange handles. He's bringing me in, and we're looking to the left. And we're like, this is an interesting looking jet. If you've seen a jet closely, it has this almost like a cheetah looking print on it. It's not filled in. It's like just a cheetah looking camo print. And we're like, who in the world does that? And we look at the tail, and the tail says whatever MJ, and has the Air Jordan symbol on it. And
Wow.
Scott immediately recognizes, like, wait a minute, that's Michael Jordan's plane. I've seen that. So, anyways, we he happened to park us right behind the jet.
That's
So we
awesome.
got out, and of course we took some pictures, and it was a pretty cool sight. We asked the ground guy. Obviously, we didn't see Michael Jordan there. We asked the the handler. We said, "Hey, what's this jet doing here?" He said, "Yeah, Michael Jordan's in town for a fishing tournament, so he comes here all the time and parks in Salisbury." So that was pretty cool. So we saw that, and then we looked right next to his jet, and we saw this bunch of fighters lined up, and I said, "Wait, what are these guys doing here? Who are these guys?" He said, "Oh, that's the Italian aerobatic team. They're here to perform at the Ocean City Air Show, and there's not enough room at Ocean City, so they park here,
Yeah.
take off, they fly by, and they come back and land here." So it was very cool to see both of those, uh, you know, sets of airplanes.
That's pretty awesome. So do you own your own airplane?
I do. I have owned for about 9 years now. I've been flying for about 10 years, and I've owned for about 9 years out of the 10.
How does that process go? Right? Is it similar to buying a car or used car, or is like buying an
Yep.
airplane like a completely different scenario?
Actually, funny enough, it's identical. There's not much different. It's exactly like buying an SUV or something, right?
Right.
You go look at airplanes. You can buy new or used, of course. I bought mine used, but a lot of people do go out and customize and purchase new airplanes. So, anyways, you go look at airplanes. You find the one you love, one that meets your needs, and one that you want to grow into, and you purchase it. You get it registered. You buy insurance on it, and you get inspection on it.
Just like a
And
car, right?
it's like a car. You get an annual inspection, which I think a car you do in New Jersey, at least you do it every 2 years, but an airplane you
Yes.
do every year. And then you have a registration, and you have insurance on the airplane, exactly like a car.
Got it. And I
Right?
assume you pay for parking or for storage
Yep.
somewhere, right?
So then you decide where you want to park it. A lot of people, a majority of people, leave it outside because it's less cost prohibitive, right? So leave it on the ramp in the on by the taxiways. I have a hangar. Actually, when I bought my plane, the plane was in the hangar when I went to look at it. So the person that I bought it from just transferred the hangar over to me.
Nice.
There's usually a long waiting list for hangars, more especially in a state like New Jersey where there's not enough hangars and there's a lot of demand for hangars. So it's sometimes hard to find a hangar. But I was fortunate that the plane came with the hanger, right?
Yeah, I was going to say it sounds like an issue if you buy the airplane. There's no hanger. Like I'm sure, as much as supportive as your wife is, I'm not sure she'd want an airplane on your front lawn for 6 months or a year waiting for that hanger, right?
Yeah, I don't think she'd like that very much.
Nor would your
Yeah,
neighbors probably,
and
right?
I didn't want to leave it outside because the elements. We live again. We have four
Sure.
seasons with the heat beating
Yes,
down in the summer and the snow in the winter. It takes a toll on the airplanes as well. But you
definitely does.
decide, right? Some people wait out and say the money we're saving from paying the hangar rental, we'll apply that towards repairs and upgrades or
Of course.
other things.
But as you said, it sounds like it worked out well that the person who sold you the plane already had a hangar, so that just kind of worked out perfectly for you, which is awesome. So in talking to Scott, our good buddy, he told me to ask you about something. So first, for our listeners, for those of you that do or don't know, I have been known to go to the movies by myself. I've gone on vacations by myself. Like I have no issue with that, right? Like I often refer to myself as kind of a hybrid introvert extrovert. So like I am kind of introvertish. I'll do a lot of introvert things, but like I'll kind of I guess act up or whatever as an extrovert if I need to, like professionally, socially, whatever else like that. So like I said, I go to Disney World by myself, movies all the time. It is what it is. Our buddy Scott told me to ask Amit about his solo night on each family vacation. I have zero context to it. I can assume, I guess, but I don't have any details on this. Anything you could share on this one?
Absolutely, happy to. So we travel a good amount. We love to travel. My wife, me, my kids. I mean, not trying to brag about this, but just give an idea. So my son is now 6. He's been to over 24 countries.
Oh wow,
My daughter is 10. She's been to about almost 30 countries, 28 countries, I think. We've obviously traveled to 35, 36 countries.
hey, I mean,
We
on a side note, do you know how many countries I've been to?
No, I have no idea.
The answer is four.
Four
Um,
countries.
yeah, I've lived in America for all my life. I went to Canada about a half a dozen times, maybe a dozen, I don't know. Went to
Yeah.
Mexico. I was in Tijuana for about 5 minutes, and then Japan this past summer. So for me, I've got legitimately four countries. So hearing that, your two young kids have like 10 times the number of countries as me is intriguing. So please continue.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's a personal preference. I don't think it's
Absolutely.
one's better than the other. I think it's we love to travel. We love to experience cultures and foods and meet people, right? We love we love history. We love architecture. So we usually between the food and the cultural and historical elements, that's how we plan our trips. Um, so anyway, so so we obviously food you can't avoid. When you go out and you're traveling, you eat food, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, so you get enough exposure to it. Obviously history and culture. History you don't avoid. You plan your trips around them. You go to the monuments and the ruins and whatnot. The people are harder to connect with, right? When you're traveling and you're busy, you have a schedule planned out. You're typically doing touristy things during the day.
Right.
You're doing you've looked up the most interesting things to do in that city, and you're doing what other tourists do in that. So one of my rules is that when I'm out in another country, another city, one of the nights I go out, and I don't go out a lot. I don't go to New York City and party. I'm not a party animal, right? I don't do it for the party aspect of it, but I do it for the people aspect. So one of the nights I will leave once the kids are in bed and my wife is comfortable. She has a glass of wine. I'll go out
Nice.
and I'll try to go to some bars. I'll make some local friends. I'll meet some local people, and I'll exchange conversation with them. Right. I'll learn about their history. I'll learn about their background, how they were raised. I'll learn about things about their country that I would not have necessarily seen on this trip or learned about on this trip. Some of their traditions, right? Some stuff that you can only really hear from a person. So that's my solo night. So I tend to do a lot of these, and sometimes I tend to get in some trouble.
So
It's
we're gonna try to keep you out of jail or international jail. So maybe
yeah.
don't
So
keep you
far,
into
so
that.
good.
But the
So
question I
far,
have
so
for you
good.
is like, do you have any like Amit traditions? So like you do this every trip, you get your solo night. Like, is there a drink that you always have, or is there
Yeah,
something like any kind of routine that you always do or
it's
kind of kick into?
yeah. It's a local drink. I'll ask the bartenders for recommendations there.
Okay,
I'll always have their local drink. So whatever the local drink is, and we were in Mexico City this year in July, and I made the mistake of asking for the local drink. And I don't know if you heard of pulque. Pulque. Have you heard of
I've
pulque?
not. What is that?
Okay, it's a Mexican drink that's made by fermenting the agave sap, and it is probably one of the most disgusting things I've had in my life. I mean, Uh, I can't. I choose not to describe it to you, but it's a thick, white, sappy-looking drink that's fermented,
Got it.
smells like bleach, tastes like bleach. I don't know why people drink it, but I think it's an acquired taste.
Sure.
Supposed to give you, supposed to have an effect on longevity. I mean, for them it's tradition. There've been people there have been drinking it for many hundreds and thousands of years actually.
Wow.
It's supposed to be a very healthy antidote, but it was one of the most disgusting things I've had. But I'll to answer your question in short, I'll always try the local drink and the local foods when I go out with the locals.
Nice. Very cool. Awesome. So we are running short on time here. So I wanted to give you the opportunity if you wanted to plug anything, send any socials, whatever you want to kind of talk to or support, feel free.
Yeah, no, I think we've talked about flying. So I'm always interested in taking people up flying. So if people do want to go flying, I'm happy to oblige if you feel comfortable with it. I love to, I mean, like, I'm just like you said, I'm an extrovert. I enjoy another person in the cockpit with me. So it's always good to show someone the ropes and show someone what flying is about. Just like me, a lot of people seem very, people ask me about flying in their own airplane. It seemed very starstruck. Oh, wow, that's crazy. You must be rich. You must be, whatever, right? And it's really not that. It's no different than owning a car. It's very similar. And in fact, now because I fly, a lot of my friends have airplanes. It's very normal to have airplanes in my friend circle, right? And we
Sure.
make plans and we'll fly together to go to Ocean City or go to Florida or Wisconsin, or we've traveled across the country to air shows and visiting friends and family in Chicago and in Raleigh, North Carolina. So it's very reasonable. I do it just like you pull a car out of the garage and you travel. I pull an airplane out and I go flying.
Nice.
So happy to take you up, Jeff. Hopefully, you're the next passenger who goes up with me. And of course, if anyone has questions about it, I'm happy to talk to them about it.
Cool. So appreciate the offer. Obviously, I would hope that you have barf bags on the plane because if you want to be prepared for me, it's probably what's needed. For anybody out there who's interested in connecting with Amit, I'll make sure to tag him in the social posts communicating about this podcast. So definitely take a look. With that said, again, we are running low on time. Amit, this has been amazing. Thank you for coming on. Maybe I'll have you on again sometime in the near future because we didn't even really get to talk about growing up in India, which for me would be intriguing as well. We talked about flying airplanes and what you've done since then, which is incredible. But I would actually love to hear a lot more about your story. So if it's okay with you, I'd love to have you back, in a couple of weeks or so again.
I'd love to. I'd love to be back. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, Jeff. Thanks for the
Cool.
opportunity.
Absolutely. So, with that said, guys, thank you all so much for joining. I really appreciate everybody who's been listening to the podcast, watching the podcast. So much fun. Just as a reminder, you can reach us on YouTube at Everybody Has a Story Pod, Instagram at Everybody Has a Story Pod. My personal Instagram is at Seltzer77 for all things Jeff Seltzer. As always, you can check me out at jeffseltzer.com. Tell your friends, your neighbors, your family, your cousins, whoever you want. We are over on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, iHeartRadio, Amazon, Castbox, Good Pods, Pandora, all those fun places. Follow us, auto download, comments, all the fun stuff the algorithm loves. Do that. That's the way that it is. Again, if you want to be a guest at some point, DM me at Everybody Has a Story Pod. With that said, I hope everybody has an amazing week. Next week's going to be an awesome episode. So as we are recording right now, I'm getting ready to go to Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios Orlando with my buddy John. So when I come back from Orlando, me and John are going to have the next week's episode talking about the 10 houses, the scare zones, the show, and how this is my 12 or 13th year going to Halloween Horror Nights. So really excited about it. Next week, you can hear all about our adventures. With that said, have an amazing week, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Cheers.